The Hidden Wound Revisited. White People and Racism. Fall 2011. In our world, nobody can escape oppression. Stereotypes, prejudices, and governmental policies make it hard for everyone to truly understand the meaning of life and enjoy simple happiness. Even people who have a lot of money are oppressed by today's world's values. But for them, it's much easier not to pay attention to it. Those who are more obviously affected by continuous mistreatment are people of color, women, and the poor. But being a white person definitely leaves a mark on my life too. And I can see how I am oppressed both as a woman and as a white woman. But I also understand that I have privileges, especially because I'm white. If oppression is in fact a pervasive aspect of our society, then it must mean that we are all affected, even when we supposedly are in a position of privilege. So, what I'm really curious about is how oppression affects those who are not the immediate or obvious victims of mistreatment. How, for instance, am I, as a white person, affected by racism towards people of color? This topic got my attention immediately after I started thinking about it. The question wasn't easy. I was sure at first that when you're white, you're advantaged by racism, and certainly aren't oppressed by it. But as time went on, ideas started coming to me. I realized how naive I was to believe that one might escape the negative effects of living in a society in which oppression of anyone is part of its social norms and traditions. In this way, we can see that in a world where people of color are oppressed, white people will also suffer systematic, institutionalized mistreatment. A racist system limits our understanding of other people's lives and ideas and creates a world of unreality where only white people count. This idea came to me when we watched a video in class about classism. There was one episode about a white community that built a physical wall between itself and their black neighbors in order to protect their property values. This put the idea into my head about how white people can be affected by racism. The effect on black people is definitely more severe, but the effect on white people is in some ways more dangerous. At least black communities live in the real world and realize that there are many people and races in the world that are successful and don't need the help of whites. On the other hand, white people, by being cut off from the rest of the world, define themselves as the best and most successful race on the planet. And we think we did it all on our own. One aspect of oppression for me is the systematic misinformation that major institutions like government, schools, universities, and corporations generate. I missed a lot of opportunities being raised in such conditions, where I constantly received wrong information about my race and other races. For example, by now, if I had been raised in an equal society, I could have had many more friends from other countries and different backgrounds. I could be more educated about the world around me and share more knowledge with other people. Instead, the racist system generates discomfort for me to communicate with people of color. When I first moved to the United States, I'm not sure what I actually felt when I met black or Asian people. Maybe it was a sense of dominance or a sense of pity, but I definitely got in the way of interacting with them. This has now changed, and I'm very interested to learn from them and always ask a lot of questions. But it took extra work to feel a connection to people of color, and often our relationships fell apart. It happened exactly because I wasn't raised in conditions where I could learn about non-white communities. The society did so many things to separate me from all of the unique and interesting people around the world. I was told that only white people could be credible and trustworthy. I feel these effects of oppression everywhere. I have white friends. I talk more with white people than with black or brown people. When first starting at college here, I was more likely to ask for help from a white person rather than from a person of color. I just realized it and it made me scared. How could I assume that whites know more than other people? I guess I don't even think about it when I do such things. For hundreds of years, the white society imposed the idea that the white race is more powerful and independent. We didn't need help from people of color. We were told they don't have any valuable information to share with us. Their contributions to society were made invisible to us. Continuously, generation from generation, white people accepted this information and started to believe in it. It is all so wrong. While life for working class and poor whites can be very hard, white privilege still makes the lives of white people materially easier in comparison to people of color of the same class. This creates the illusion of our success, but also puts under question our accomplishments. Because on average it takes less effort for white people to succeed in our world, we don't have to try as hard. Thus, we sometimes have less knowledge than people of color. This idea came to me after reading the article by Peggy McIntosh, White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. In her article, she says, I began to count the ways in which I enjoy unearned skin privilege and have been conditioned to oblivion about its existence. She listed many privileges which I see make my life much less stressful and easier than the lives of people of color. On the other hand, because of such a way of life, I don't have to try to work as hard. Now, every time I succeed in my life, I'm not sure if it was because of my superior abilities and knowledge, or was it just because I'm white? It really harms my self-esteem knowing that I am being judged on the basis of my race and not on the basis of my experience. It is so depressing to know that if I get a loan, a low interest rate, or a raise at work, it may not be me. It may be my skin. This misjudgment affects me everywhere I go, at work, at home, and at school. Sadly, I will never know the truth. Ironically, while racism gives whites material advantages in most workplaces or in school, we are simultaneously told that whatever troubles we do have are caused by people of color. Affirmative action programs or illegal immigrants taking our jobs. Welfare recipients, code for people of color, spending our taxes. Terrorists, code for Arab or Muslim, threatening our national security. Criminals and drug users, code for black men, making our streets unsafe. So, whatever solidarity we might feel with people of color as workers or neighbors or citizens is undermined by a worldview that keeps them as alien and hostile to us. In college, racism has been affecting me in school since the day I started at De Anza. The racist system has been incorporated into the educational system for a long time. It treats white students better than people of color. White people used to think that it is good for us, when it's really not. Indulgence and overtreatment of white people make us lazy. We are sometimes not exposed to hardship, and when we encounter it, we panic and don't know how to react. Especially for white middle-class students, the nice and smooth life relaxes us too much, so we're never ready to face real life. I can see examples of it in every class I take. Many students of color work very hard to get an A, while sometimes the middle class white students don't take it seriously and slack during classes. I have a clear example of myself being in this situation. I took a chemistry class with an old, traditionally raised white professor. He quickly chose me out of the crowd of other students. I wasn't sure first why he was so kind to me, but then I realized that it was because of my skin color. He talked to me as if I knew more in chemistry than anybody else in the class. He asked me what a person like me was doing at De Anza, and was sure that I was too smart to be among other students in the class. I felt very frustrated after comments like this. I felt that I didn't earn such an attitude toward myself. So instead of feeling good that the professor liked me, I felt terrible. In lab classes, he didn't even bother to come to my table to ask if I was doing all right. He was sure that I was. But the truth is, I didn't know a lot and had to ask other students of color, to help me. I never did anything to show this right professor that I was better than others. But because he assumed that I was smart and competent, that's what he saw. And in the end, it was much easier for me to get an A than for other students. That means I studied less and came to class less prepared than the rest of the class. Who is it going to hurt eventually, other than me? When I transfer to a 4-year university, it is going to be harder for me to study and compete with other students. Or at work, I'm not going to be as successful as I could be if I studied at the same pace as other students. If I let myself imagine that every class I've taken at De Anza somehow treated me differently, then I can't be sure in my level of competitiveness compared to other students. McIntosh's article made me realize that there are other white students who have the same experience year after year. Of course, we like it and rarely look at it as oppression, but it is, and it continuously affects our lives and makes it harder to achieve good results, and most importantly, feel good about them. As a white person, I feel pressure from other white people every single day. I live in the box where I have been told that people of color are not important enough to communicate to and deal with. Sometimes when I talk to my white friends, I see how they put themselves over people of color without even realizing it. I don't like such conversations and try to avoid them. I've learned that the white community is so stubborn and so affected by social norms that it is hard to go against it. In the article, Oppression and Democracy, Nikki Gonzalez-Yan states, "Those who resist playing out their oppressive roles are themselves sanctioned. Whites who interfere with police brutality against people of color are themselves arrested and sometimes beaten." That means that I'm safe as long as I stay in my white box and follow its rules. I live in the community that accepts me as long as I fit into its norms of whiteness. That sounds depressing to me. That limits my desires and cuts my own voice. I remember one time when one American couple showed me the picture of their little son sitting in a crowd of other children. They handed me the picture with the comment, "Do you see our son? It's not hard to find him. He's the only white spot in this crowd." What did this mean, white spot? Bright spot? Better than the rest? It was hard to say, and they might not have meant anything bad. But maybe they also just accepted the fact that their son is somehow better than other children in the room. I should have said something, but I didn't. I couldn't say anything or ask because there is no language among whites to have this conversation. I had to go along with this silence because it would have been rude to start this conversation at that time. Again, this is a sign of our oppression as white people. we're so limited to understanding the real world around us, so that we make comments like this without understanding how they might be even seen or experienced by others, and what they might unconsciously actually mean to ourselves. Because of racism, not only do white people oppress people of color, but likewise, people of color sometimes treat white people badly. Continuous oppression of people of color produces constant anger towards whites. Native, Asian, African, and Mexican communities sometimes resent and hate white people and don't want to deal with them. So now my opportunities are often limited to my white community because other communities may not give me a chance to be my full self and to show my abilities. I know there are so many businesses managed by people of color, and there are so many excellent experts in their fields from whom I might learn. But because of the racist system, it is much harder for me to be involved in their work. I simply might not be hired because I'm white and because of what my whiteness does and stands for. I personally didn't do anything wrong, or at least never meant to, but I pay for it with yet more limitations in my life. For example, I've tried several times to become a server in the restaurants managed by people of color. I love Asian food and have experience working in this area, but every time I leave my resume at these places, I don't get any responses. Why not? I'll probably never know the reason, and because we have no real framework for this discussion, how can we even begin to talk? For me, it seems like systematic mistreatment, one group against another group. Whites mistreat people of color, and people of color in revenge keep whites at a distance. Racist principles are deeply ingrained in our society. But as long as we are willing to fight back, the problem can be solved. We should not only talk about it, and I think communication about this issue is helpful, but also we need to take action. In my case, after what I have learned in this class, I want to educate my friends and family about how oppression of people of color negatively affects all of our lives. It is not favorable for any of the communities to have that attitude toward each other. As Ricky Shrover-Marcuse writes, racism hurts all of us, whether or not we're members of the targeted group. When I told my husband that I am writing a paper about oppression of whites, he was skeptical about the outcome. He even advised me to choose a different topic because there's no such thing as oppression of whites. Now, I can argue with anyone that white communities are damaged by our systematic ignorance and misinformation, our deep isolation, our oblivious acceptance of our privilege, and the way white racism sets us up to be hated and ostracized by people of color. However, talking to my community is not enough. To go out of my area of comfort, I can try to communicate with Latino, Native, Asian, or Black communities and participate in their discussions. I want not only to be familiar with their cultures, but also with their problems and concerns. Volunteering by their side will expand my understanding of our roles in the society and will help us build a society where their work and their lives count as much as mine. It is in my and my community's interest to stop the inequality. By going to City Hall, sending emails to and phoning elected officials, and supporting bills and leaders that help fight inequality, I will make a tremendous difference in shaping people's minds and changing their actions.